Wonderful. Well, first I'd like to start off by acknowledging BOEM, our funding agency, and they and their predecessors have been involved with this project since it began in 1979. So without them, none of this research and this information would be available. And then my co-authors on this are Janet Clark, Millie Brower, and Amy Willoughby, and the four of us are the core team members of ASAMM, and we work year-round on this project, ramping up for field seasons and then editing the data, writing reports, and responding to any needs. And our email addresses are shown right there next to our names. And that's about it for that. I did my best to make this heavy on photos and light on text. This slide is one of the exceptions, and I thought of using a dancing ball and singing this slide to make it go over a little bit easier, but wasn't able to do that. But all of the real meat of the notes are in the notes section of the PowerPoint, which is uploaded to the IARPIC website. So take a look there if you want more details or if you want to remember what I said. So ASAMM has several objectives, and these have changed a little bit over the course of the survey, but not a whole lot. The first one and the main one is to monitor the spatial and temporal variability of marine mammals in the Alaskan Arctic. Also, specifically to look at the annual migration of bowhead whales because they're an important subsistence resource for Alaska natives. We also provide near real-time data or derived products such as maps or shapefiles to regulatory agencies, particularly BOEM and NIMS, but also other agencies. And there's a slide later in my talk that gives a whole slew of organizations that use our information. We also provide information about marine mammals to help in the management of subsistence hunts and to assess anthropogenic impacts on marine mammal resources. And then finally, we do the best that we can to collaborate with other researchers, physical oceanographers, acousticians, anyone who's really working in our corner of the globe up there, to provide just another source of information to help interpret the other data that are being collected in the study area.
Megan?
Yeah, go ahead.
Information in one of the bullets refers to the first objective. Is that distribution and abundance, or what do you mean by information?
We're talking the first bullet?
Sorry, the fourth.
The fourth bullet. Oh, yeah, it's distribution and abundance primarily. The other things that we're able to get are like calf data, and we have some of the best information on calf numbers, like bowhead calf numbers, and that's of interest to the International Whaling Commission Scientific Committee when they're reviewing bowhead quotas. It's not something that they have real quantitative measures for, but just kind of looking at our calf production indices provides some supplementary information on the status of the stocks. And then something along those lines are the carcass data, and I have one slide later on about that, but Amy Willoughby has a paper in prep that's actually really cool. I mean, everyone thinks that carcasses are kind of lame, but Amy's really opened our eyes to what you can do with our carcass data, and once Amy talks about her carcass data, everyone's like, oh, dead things are cool. But from the carcass data, you can find out information about longevity in the ecosystem, and also we're looking at things like entanglement scars and potential increases in killer whale predation up in our study area. So that's the kind of stuff that can also kind of go into looking at, setting quotas and stuff like that. So it's supplementary information. All right, so our study area in the bottom right, there's the globe, and we are in the eastern Chukchi Sea, western Beaufort Sea, and this figure here shows the current study area, and this has been our study area since about 2008. And we fly line-transect surveys, and those are the lines that we fly. We use the same lines for a given year, and then they're just randomly frame shifted from year to year so that we can make sure that we get uniform coverage probability over the course of several years. And I think the farthest point is like 120 nautical miles out there in the Chukchi Sea. As I mentioned before, the project started in 1979, and it has occurred every single year since then in the Western Beaufort Sea. The Eastern Chukchi Sea timeline has been a little bit more broken, but we've been consistently surveying there since 2008. The focal period is the open water season, so the longest timeline is for late August, September into October. But since 2008, we've been flying regularly starting in July. I mentioned that we've had really consistent survey protocols over time. So the time series of data really is kind of a consistent time series. There are some changes that have happened over the years, but I feel like those are pretty well documented in the metadata, so it's not like you have to go on a treasure hunt to figure out what happened when. And we update those metadata every year. The few inconsistencies in the methods have been the survey aircraft. These surveys began in a Grumman Goose aircraft, and then they were flown in a Twin Otter. Since 2011, we've been flying in a Turbo Commander because they can fly faster, and that helps us get to all the corners in our study area when we're transiting. But those are all those changes are denoted in the database. And the spatiotemporal coverage has changed, as I mentioned earlier. We fly between 1,000 and 1,500 feet above sea level, and currently with the Commander and with the Otters, we've been flying at 115 knots. The Goose had to fly faster because if it tried to fly at 115 knots, it would sink. And the primary species that we get are bowheads, gray whales, and belugas. We see a lot of polar bears, especially during the bowhead hunting season. Especially on Cross Island and Barter Island. Down in the southern part of our study area off of Point Hope and west of Kotzebue, we've been seeing more and more humpback whales, fin whales, some killer whales. We also do get gray whales down there. That's the Hope Basin area. And then another thing that we've been able to do is we've take aerial photographs of the mass walrus haul out at Point Lay. And we're sure to stay pretty far offshore and high enough so that we don't cause a disturbance there. And we work really closely with Fish and Wildlife Service and USGS to give them those photos as soon as we can and to just pass along our observations of that. So some of the products that we provide, going from left to right, during the field season, we want to get the information out to the agencies and the people who need the data as soon as possible. So we have a daily report that we draft, and we aim to get that posted to our website within 24 hours of landing. If it's a weekend, it won't get posted until Monday, but that's a pretty quick turnaround time. As I mentioned, the walrus haul out information, if our team is the first to spot the walrus haul out, we'll call from the sat phone and we'll make contacts with USGS and Fish and Wildlife Service so that they can implement whatever management or precautionary measures need to be put into place in order to protect that haul out. We also take photographs of sea ice, and we send those to the sea ice desk and a bunch of other agencies, and they use that not only to ground truth their satellite imagery, but also to help train their analysts. I mentioned the carcass data. We record every carcass that we see. If we can determine species, we'll put in a species, and with almost every carcass that we come across, we take photographs. And that photographic data has been really, really helpful with the carcasses. And then the other thing Janet does during our field season is every 2 weeks, she does a map of the cetacean sightings, the pinniped sightings, and our survey effort. And she sends that out to a distribution list that just keeps getting longer and longer. So we try and keep everyone informed about what we're seeing in real time. As I mentioned, there's the ASAMM historical database that's accessible to the public through the ASAMM website. And the URL for the ASAMM website is listed on the bottom of this slide here. That database goes all the way back to 1979, and we add the latest data as soon as BOEM has had a chance to review our annual report for the year. So for example, the 2018 data should be available online. I'm pretty sure it is. So we have a really quick turnaround time for that. Our view and BOEM's view is that these data are their value only increases the more that they're used. So we try and get it out there. We do annual reports, and we also work on peer-reviewed publications. I've shown some figures there from a few of the more recent publications that we've done. We also have a document that I refer to as Awesome ASAMM, which is probably like close to a 20-page document now, and it's the CV for the project, and it lists all of our publications, all the IHAs that the data have informed, any kind of outreach, news articles, anything that ASAMM has had a finger on is listed in that Awesome ASAMM document. So if anyone wants that, I'm happy to send that later. Here's our list of end users. So it ranges from state agencies, federal agencies, local agencies. We work really closely with the North Slope Borough Department of Wildlife Management. Also our co-management partners, the Alaska Beluga Whale Committee and the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission. Military, other private researchers in academia and private consulting companies as well. We work with them, and the International Whaling Commission. So we span quite a range of interests. So what's new in 2019? All the stuff that I've said so far has been going on since I've been with the project in 2008, really, but 2019 is a really exciting year for us. And the reason for that is that for the first time ever, ASAMM is expanding to survey the waters over in Canada. So this shows the transect lines that we'll be flying for 3 weeks in August. The goals of this survey are to derive an aerial line transect abundance estimate for the Western Arctic bowhead whales. That is needed for the IWC. They need a revised estimate every 10 years, and the new estimate is due in spring of 2021, which means that I need to have my analyses done to present a draft to IWC in spring of 2020. And in the past, these bowhead abundance estimates have been derived from ice-based counts or from aerial photographs, so photographic ID matching. Due to the deterioration in the sea ice during the spring up near Barrow, there's concern that that sea ice census is not going to be something that they'll be able to do in the future. And so they're looking for alternative means to estimate abundance. And the aerial photo ID work has been really successful, and those numbers do match pretty well with the ice census work. The problem with that, though, is that it takes about 3 years from when you collect the data to when the estimate is ready, just due to the fact that it's very labor intensive to go through and match those images. So we're testing out these Line-Transect surveys for the first time on this stock. As you can see, our study area is going to reach all the way over to Amundsen Gulf. Hopefully we'll get those lines off Banks Island. And then there's some indication that this stock might spend some time up in Viscount Melville Sound. So if we can get up there, we can, but it's so far away from our bases of operation in Inuvik and Ulukaktuk that once we get up there, we aren't going to be able to spend a whole lot of time, but we'll do our best. So that's the big new thing for 2019. Now, because we want to get an estimate of absolute abundance here, there were some correction factors that we need to derive. And we hadn't worried about those correction factors in the past because the goals of the project had been to look at relative abundance or relative density. So in 2018, we implemented and tested some new protocols in order to get at those correction factors. And the next few slides that I'll be showing you now are just quick overviews of those new protocols. Oh, no, they'll come up soon. The other key issue that we're dealing with this year is we're taking aerial photographs of gray whales up in the eastern Chukchi Sea to try to provide information into this gray whale unusual mortality event. So 3 of us are on the task force that NOAA has organized to look into this UME. And we're working closely with the body condition team, and they're developing methods, metrics to quantitatively and qualitatively evaluate gray whale body condition based on live and carcass data. So we're working really closely with them. And these are images from this year. We haven't seen gray whales that look just totally starved. They seem kind of normal to us, but we haven't implemented any of the body condition assessment protocols yet. We have had more carcasses than we normally see by this time of the year, but I would say that it's still a little too early to say for sure. So the jury's out on that, but we're collaborating really closely. The other collaboration we have, I believe this is our 2nd year now doing a collaboration with ConocoPhillips. They are interested in gathering baseline information for this area in Harrison Bay and near Point Lonely. So it's blown up in the bottom right. So we're working with them. They provided some funding to ASAMM to fly these 2 little stretches of coastal transect once a week. And it works out really well for us because you know, it provides supplementary funding for the project. It works out really well for them because they don't have to hire an airplane and observers. The data go into the ASAMM database. It's one seamless thing. So it's been a really fruitful collaboration. So one of the bias correction factors we need to address is availability bias, and that refers to animals that are at the surface of the water, but we can't, or actually, it's whether the animal is available to be seen. And so there's 2 factors that go into that. Either the animal might not be at the surface of the water, or the animal's at the surface of the water, but it's not in the observer's field of view. And field of view, when I first got into this, I was like, oh, easy, you know, it's gonna be a snap. There's a couple of papers out on that, but it's actually really hard to quantitatively define the field of view for an aircraft. What we've settled on doing is we fly transects at varying distances from a Connex box on the tundra, which is just like a shipping container. And we measure the time that an observer can see that Connex box. And that lets me derive the angles and the shape of this dark triangle here. And the whole point is that the longer a whale is in view, the greater the probability is that an observer is going to be able to see it. And even with the Turbo Commander aircraft that we fly in, the left and right bubble windows are configured slightly differently, and so there's a slightly different field of view for the left and right side. So if we want to come up with a correction factor for that, we need to come up with what those dimensions of the field of view are. And we had 2 really successful flights last year to define this for the Turbo Commander. This year, if in a perfect world, we would test a couple more observers just to get a larger sample size. But if I have to, I can manage with the data that we have. The other thing that we're doing are these bowhead whale focal group follows. So this is another component of availability bias, and it looks at the amount of time a bowhead whale is at the surface available to be seen, as opposed to the amount of time that it's underwater and you can't see it. And there's a lot of really great data on these surface and dive times for individual animals, but it's a whole other story when you're looking at groups. And by groups, I mean like 2 to 5 animals. If there's more than 5 animals, there's usually someone at the surface all the time, but there's a lot of social dynamics that go into groups of 2 to 5. And we had, I think, 2 focal group follows last year, but last year was a weird year because of all the sea ice. This year, we've had 2 fabulous focal group follows, and this image was taken from one we did about 10 days ago. It was nearly a Beaufort zero, like hardly any disturbance on the water. We got on 3 bowhead whales, and we were able to follow them for almost 3 hours. And this was an unusual event because they weren't diving very deeply, and there was only maybe 10 minutes when the entire group was not visible. At all other times, we could see at least 1 animal in the group at the surface of the water. So that's a new piece of data that we're collecting to go into the abundance estimate. Another thing is we have a belly port camera mounted to the aircraft, and it essentially collects a photographic strip transect. So it takes images every 2 to 3 seconds. And we are using those to get at perception bias. So that is animals that are at the surface, they're within the field of view, but the observers aren't detecting it. But this is also a good source of information, like if anyone were interested in a complete photographic strip transect survey of sea ice, for example. These data are available, they're archived, they have lat long, time, date, and camera specs all embedded in the metadata. And we're actually providing a set of these data to the Australians who are working on trying to develop an auto detector for marine mammals to facilitate the use of UAS. So this is another really good source of data that we're collecting. I believe this is my last slide. 2019 is the last year that ASAMM has secured funding. So we're working really closely with BOEM, with the North Slope Borough to come up with alternate funding sources. As I showed before that slide of end users, there are a lot of agencies and entities who use these data. And so we're just trying to tap into the resources, and we hope that we'll be back flying again in 2020, and we'll do our best to get there. So now I'm happy to take any questions that anyone has. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Megan. That was a really great presentation. Does anyone have a question for Megan?
Megan, this is Renee. What aircraft are you using, and what's the potential to use UASs?
Okay, let me see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I've done something silly with oh, there we go. So we worked with BOEM in 2015, and we tested the use of a ScanEagle UAS to derive density and abundance estimates for a small area, just focused in the Barrow Canyon area, really. And so granted, we were using a ScanEagle, and it has a pretty hefty logistics component associated with it because it needs the launcher and the retriever and everything. There were several issues that we ran into with that besides the logistics issue. One was there really aren't good auto detectors available yet, and we found that it took about 7 hours to manually process 1 flight hour's worth of data, of imagery data. And if you compare that to what we can do with our visual observer data, we can have those survey data edited, QA, QC'd within an hour of landing. And that's for the whole flight. So there's a big labor load in processing those data. The other thing we found was the UAS project was more expensive than using the visual observers. It was, if I remember correctly, it was almost an order of magnitude more expensive. The other concern we had to do just with safety. There's no required detect and avoid technology that both UAS and manned aircraft need to have at the same time. And so pilots in manned aircraft, they don't have a good warm fuzzy that they're going to be able to detect the UAS that are up there. So I think that's a safety issue that needs to be addressed, especially for a government agency like NOAA to be going up and flying beyond line of sight. So, and then the last thing was that the sample size that we got in the imagery, it was pretty small compared to what we were getting from the human observers, just because their field of view is better. And so due to that sample size, the precision of the estimates derived from the UAS was less than the visual observers. So I think all of these things are things that we'll be able to solve with time, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Megan, this is Danielle Dixon. I'm curious if you have done any presentations yet up on the North Slope or along the Chukchi coast to communities and communicated that funding is not secure beyond 2019. And if you have, I'm curious if you've heard feedback from people on the ground who you didn't necessarily know were looking at the data and using it, but whether people living there that are potentially involved in things like whaling and subsistence, if they've expressed concern over not having that information in the future.
So I haven't had those conversations myself. I know that our colleagues at the North Slope Borough Department of Wildlife Management have spoken to people on the Alaska Eskimo Whaling Commission and let them know the situation. And there's definitely some concern there. We're working really closely with BOEM to come up with some kind of like working group or workshop or something after the fall whaling. We don't really know yet what that's going to look like, but I would like that to be an opportunity to share what ASAMM has been able to provide to date, some of the challenges that it might be able to provide information for in the future, and get feedback from potential funders, but also have a chance to hear some of the stakeholder and co-management concerns as well. But that's definitely still a work in progress. But I think that's really going to be a good opportunity to get that kind of feedback that you're talking about. Kathy, did you have anything you wanted to add to that? Because Kathy's really involved in that plan.
No, thanks for asking, Megan. No, we are, Danielle, that's a really good question. This survey's been going on for a very long time, and it seems that many agencies and other stakeholders use the information, and just from a BOEM perspective, it's just not something that we're able to afford alone. So here we have the opportunity to use IARPIC collaborations or other mechanisms, including going out to communities and involving discussions with AEWC and others, later this fall to figure out what we can do. And I think that we're going to be, thinking out of the box. I think there's some other good examples for federal projects programs that have, switched away from solely federal funding. The Aleutian Bering Sea, the ABSEA, Aleutian Bering Sea, formerly the LCC, has been really effective at that. So we're just committed to finding a new path forward.
I'm sorry. Could you clarify what activity the ABSEA, we now call ourselves initiative, was helpful with? This is Karen Pletnikoff.
Oh, well, thanks, Karen. Well, my understanding is that Aaron Poe at the Aleutian Bering Sea initiative has been really successful in securing, I guess I would call it, NGO funding to have projects coordinate on issues in the Aleutians and Bering Sea. So that was my, I guess, perhaps off the cuff thought on how using a kind of a out of the box example of seeking how you carry on, you know, a program. So for example, you know, Megan pointed out that industry funded a portion of the survey the last 2 years. Well, you know, that is just a very small percentage of what the total cost would be for, you know, a full Chukchi and Beaufort survey. So, you know, trying to figure out how other federal agencies or perhaps, you know, a borough or, you know, I mean, I don't know what funds AEWC has, but we're really trying to think of out of the box ways to come up with carrying this project forward. So I didn't have a specific example of ABSI rather than the fact that they've been successful at pulling together different sources of funds.
Sure, thank you very much for that. I just wanted to make sure that you weren't bringing it up in the context of some earlier initiatives that we had done that were, I don't know, maybe marginally successful about trying to coordinate boat time opportunities throughout the Bering. Not as northernly focused, but definitely didn't exclude that kind of information. So I'll be sure to report back to ABSI, first off, your overall interest in seeing boat time coordination with amongst yourselves, but also our effectiveness. Thanks.
Yeah, great. And happy to talk offline too. I think we might have a couple questions in the room or clarifications. I see Craig and Maureen are here, so stand by.
Hi, Megan. This is Craig Perrin with BOEM. Hey, I just had a question, and it probably comes into the funding arena as well. It's good to see that you guys are looking at getting an absolute abundance estimate with going over there to Canada. And I was just wondering, and there might be some of these folks, the NIMS folks on the line, the ESA folks and the MMPA folks, I'm sure they've been looking at trying to get kind of like a good estimate of abundance for their arenas as well. Have you ever talked to any of those folks, whether it's here in the Anchorage office or the Silver Springs office, to see if there's, and I don't know their funding sources, but to see if there's internal NIMS, other branches or divisions that could help support, you know, these surveys for the future ongoing?
Hey, Megan, this is Candace. Do you want me to jump in?
Yeah, that's great, Candace.
Hi, Candace.
Hey, guys. Yeah, so we started a process here called budget resource reallocation, and centers and different offices put in requests for potentially shifting funds around. But as you can imagine, it's a very, you know, difficult, long process, but the option to do that is there, to put in a proposal to shift funds from one thing to something else. But we're basically working under a zero-sum game.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, second.
Hi, Megan, this is Maureen Dezayu, and I just had a question, actually not related to funding, but just about the results. I was, not to put you on the spot, but I was looking forward to seeing something of how the results were presented, and in particular, I was thinking about, you know, this being a long-term data set, if, you know, how you present or how you're using trend data, you know, the trends in distribution of all these different species, and then the next step would be, how does that, is there ongoing work to connect that data with, you know, oceanographic changes and whatnot that is going on in the Bering and the Chukchi?
That's a great question, Maureen. Thank you. So we have been actively working on that, and so a couple of the examples I can give you. One is Jeff Givens has analyzed our Eastern Chukchi sea beluga data, or what we believe to be eastern Chukchi sea belugas, the best we can tell. And he should have he presented that report to the International Whaling Commission Scientific Committee this spring, and it was an investigation of abundance over time. So that's one example. That awesome ASAMM document that I referred to, that I haven't shared with IARPC, but I can upload to my profile so that it's available. It lists all of the papers that we've contributed to use the ASAMM data to look at things like trends over time or to understand mechanisms. The other thing, we have had a couple of papers come out looking at potential changes in the occurrence and the density of what we refer to as subarctic cetaceans. So those are the humpback whales, fin whales, and minke whales that we're starting to see in our study area. The other thing is I am currently working on some new analyses that will comprise a good chunk of a chapter in the new Bowhead whale book. That chapter is based on the ASAMM data, and it's looking at spatial temporal variability in bowhead whale use of the Western Beaufort Sea over time. And for that analysis, I'm looking at changes in density and distribution going all the way back to 1982. So I feel like I'm not going to be able to really get into the analytical meat of it for the chapter, but then that would be a standalone paper, but that's a new analysis. So yes, the short answer is we have some of that information published. We're still working on more of it, and I will upload that document, that awesome ASAMM document, to my profile and make it available to the IARPC community.
Hi, Megan. This is Sarah from IARPC, and thanks for this really great presentation. It just covers the interest of collaboration with history, internationally, with other agencies. It's just a really interesting and great program, and I'm so glad to learn more about it. Thanks for uploading that document. I'm trying to take a look at it. I have a question about the international collaboration. So can you explain how that came about with the Canadians, and are they paying for that new portion that you'll be doing in 2019? And then the second question I have is, do you have any collaborations with the Russians?
I'll answer the easy question first. We don't currently have any collaborations with the Russians. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. I do go to the IWC Scientific Committee meetings, and there are Russian delegates there, but that's not really a formal ASAMM collaboration. With the Canadians, no, Canada is not providing funding. We have consulted with them about things like community outreach, because we know that, we're just visitors in this area, and we want to be very respectful of the people who live there and hunt there and survive on the land and the sea. And so they helped a lot with the outreach that the North Slope Borough also helped us with back in November. And they have a beluga survey going on right now, and they're going to share their data from their beluga surveys with us, and we're going to share our data from the bowhead whale survey with them, just in case the animals do something that we aren't expecting, and it might help us to expand our time series a little bit. So that's really been the extent of the collaboration with Canada.
Thank you.
All right, does anyone else have any questions for Megan? All right, well, Megan, thank you so much for that presentation. It's been really great to hear about what you've been doing this year and what's going on that's new. And we look forward to hearing more about progress towards sustaining funding for the ASAMM project.
Thanks everyone for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.